Let's bring in Newt Gingrich. He's been monitoring all this, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, and author of Trump and the American Future. Newt, put this in perspective, because you were there in '94, and I'm very aware of the historic nature of what Jimmy Carter did in '79. And then you think about what this could lead to in terms of Sudan, Oman, and Bahrain, and who knows, Saudi Arabia.
Well, look, this explains part of the Never Trump movement, because President Trump got to this extraordinary breakthrough by doing exactly the opposite of what the American foreign policy establishment had been failing at for 30 years. When I was Speaker, we passed a bill to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Israel is the only country in the world we did not allow to name their own capital. And every single year, presidents, Democrat and Republican, would waive the bill and refuse to do it. Trump came in, and he understood the key point, which is, if you show you're tough in a neighborhood that's very tough, if you prove to the Saudis and the UAE and others that you'll stand up with them as allies against Iran, suddenly things become possible that were impossible under the appeasement process that had dominated both parties. I'll give Jared Kushner enormous credit. The first trip they took was to Riyadh, where the King of Saudi Arabia had brought 54 countries, the largest Muslim gathering ever, to meet with an American president. And President Trump spent 3 full days there, constantly escorted by the king, learning, talking, opening things up. All this was done in very close alliance with Israel. And I think you're going to see 2 or 3 more countries recognize Israel, maybe even before the end of this year. It's a great achievement. Jared Kushner has every right to be very proud of his role, because at the direction of his father-in-law, he's taken the lead on this now for almost 4 full years. So I think we should look at this as the beginning. I mean, if it turns out to truly be the beginning, you start to see Bahrain or Kuwait or Sudan, or even in the long run, Saudi Arabia, you've just changed the whole region.
Surely, and they changed it today with that first flight from Israel to the United Arab Emirates that those U.S. officials were on board. Speaking of U.S. officials, Newt, after the RNC on Thursday night, after the big fireworks show, and everybody said, okay, that's it, go home, have a nice night. A number of prominent Republicans were harassed and threatened as they left the event. In particular, Rand Paul was on our show on Friday, and he said if the police weren't there, he thought that they would have killed him. And he said there were a number of death threats. And, you know, that was his point of view. He said there should be an investigation by the Department of Justice into who those people are, because he felt they were being paid. They were from out of town. He said they had clean clothes. They were being financed. Ken Buck, a congressman from Colorado, tweeted this out. The Department of Justice needs to open an investigation into who is funding these violent riots. So, Newt, you know, it's one thing to stand and yell at somebody and yell inappropriate words, dirty words, cuss words, stuff like that. That's one thing. But to make death threats, which Rand Paul said he and his wife received, a death threat against a federal officer is a felony. So should there be a DOJ investigation?
Sure, but it goes beyond that. In Kenosha, they just arrested 3 out-of-state vehicles when they, frankly, trailed them and found them at a gas station filling up containers with gasoline. And they opened up the vehicles, and they had all sorts of combat equipment. And they had clearly come for the purpose of bringing violence to Kenosha. Look, I'm very hard line on this. I'm a historian. I lived through the violence of the 60s when we had 2,500 bombings in this country. The only way you break this is you just keep arresting people until there's no one left. And I think they need to take every video they can. They need to ask people to send us whatever video you might have taken. They need to track these people down. They need to charge them with the highest possible crime. And the reason is simple. You have to break the fever by which these people on the left, Antifa and others, have come to believe that they have the right, as they just did in Portland, where they killed a Trump supporter. And by the way, almost none of the news media were willing to say that this was a Trump supporter killed by somebody on the left. I watched the mayor last night, Mayor Wheeler, and frankly, it was so pathetic for 45 minutes. He said 94 days of violence. And his answer to it was to plead with people to not be violent.
And blame Trump. And blame Trump.
Yeah, and to blame Trump, which, by the way, Joe Biden did. Totally dishonest analysis. It's, the cities that are in big trouble are all left-wing cities with left-wing mayors. Chicago. I mean, people are fleeing these cities. New York, St. Louis. And I think you're going to see this continue until we, in fact, stand up for civilization and say, no, you don't have the right. And by the way, assault is saying things which are a direct threat to a person. So you don't have to actually attack them. That's battery.
Right.
You can be guilty of assault, and that's a prisonable offense. And until we're prepared to defend civilization, we shouldn't be surprised that there are predators. And my next newsletter is on the Democrats as the Lion King party, because they all behave as though there are no predators. They all behave as though lions and zebras love each other. This is insanity. And we ought to say that's what it is. This is not an ideological debate. This is a group of people who are simply wrong about reality.
Right.
And as a result, stores are being destroyed, businesses are being wiped out, people are being damaged because we don't have people willing to stand up for civilization.
All right. Newt Gingrich joining us from Rome, I believe, on this Monday morning. Sir, thank you very much.